they should have registered.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Seitz, and I'm the president and CEO of Big Red Sports Network, Cornell's student-run media sports group on campus. I'm incredibly excited to present to you a panel this afternoon featuring some of Cornell's and the America East's leaders in academia and athletics. So without further ado, let me kick it over to Kari Price, a leader at BRSN. And before I go, just make sure to check us out on all podcast platforms. Kari's actually leading a new podcast called Amped this semester. So check that out on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And be sure to check us out on bigredsportsnetwork.org. Thanks so much and enjoy the program.
All right, thank you, Mike. So welcome everyone to BRSN and Cornell Minds Matters Mental Health and Sports panel. I hope everybody's having a wonderful Monday, like he said. BRSN is Cornell's only student-run broadcast media and journalism organization dedicated entirely to Cornell sports. Their mission is to meaningfully connect students, alumni, and fans of Cornell sports and athletes through empowered storytelling. Exactly what we're here to do today in an exploration of athlete mental health. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Kari, class of 2022 junior on the Cornell women's tennis team. And I'm really delighted to welcome our panelists, Professor Emily Zitek, Amy Huchthausen, Commissioner of the American East Conference, and Mike Schafer, our very own head coach of Cornell men's ice hockey. So welcome, guys. So happy to be speaking with you all and see you guys' faces virtually. Could we do some introductions to give everyone a better sense of who you guys are? And could you guys also add like one thing that you do for your mental health? Maybe I'll pass it to Coach Mike Schafer.
Well, thanks. So my name is Mike Schafer. I'm a Cornell grad of '86. Been at Cornell now for 26 seasons, call it 25, one COVID season. I've been in coaching for over 35 years. And one thing I do for mental health, I try to do something that's fun each day. That brings me some type of joy, and whatever that might be for that course of the day. So.
Oh, I'd love to hear that. Professor?
Hello, I am an associate professor in the ILR school, and I teach sports psychology. So I've taught a lot of athletes through that, and ILR students, of course. I've also been the advisor for club softball, club ultimate frisbee. I've coached the club ultimate frisbee team on campus before, so I've interacted with students in a lot of different ways. Looking forward to talking to you all today. And I definitely try to take breaks and try to, tackle stressors to the extent I can as a way of trying to maintain my mental health.
Great, and I'm Amy Huchthausen. I'm Commissioner of the America East Conference. I appreciate the invite to sort of crash this Cornell party from the outside. We're based in Boston though, so obviously in the Northeast. Binghamton University is probably our closest campus to Cornell, so certainly familiar with the campus and the area. I've been here for 10 years as commissioner of the conference and worked in different conference offices before coming here. For my mental health, I try, during COVID, has been really important. I became addicted to my Peloton, especially during the winter months when you couldn't really get outside. And now that it's getting nicer here in Boston, I try to go on long walks. Like I'll do it after my meetings end. After the session actually ends, I'll go on a walk probably for like an hour just to clear my head and enjoy the nice weather. So it's really important for me to stay active. I found that that's really something that I need to stay fresh and keep my mind in a good space.
Oh man, that sounds lovely. I guess I didn't share what I do for my mental health. So many different things. I've got a puzzle over here. I got addicted to those during quarantine. I think that helps me unwind, and mindfulness and meditation and yoga, that sort of thing. But thank you guys so much for those introductions. Now I'd like to open up a discussion with our guests because we have a wealth of information and cool perspectives on our panel today. got a sports psychologist, a successful coach who values mental health and applies it to his team, and another unique perspective from an entire other conference. So you're not crashing the party. We're so happy to have you here, Commissioner. To frame and kick the conversation off, I just want to ask generally, how do sports play into mental health? No pun intended, but what is the relationship between sports and mental health in general? Okay, I know Professor Zitek, you have all types of psych research on this, anger, aggression in athletics, in technical fouls in the NBA, to self-compassion and poor performance. Do you have any thoughts on that relationship?
Sure, I'll get started on this. So yes, as you're mentioning, there's a lot of research showing the benefits of sports and exercise for mental health. Exercising is really good at increasing positive emotions and decreasing negative emotions. Exercise is associated with reduced depression, reduced anxiety. I've done some studies on the Cornell campus. For example, we found that when people were exiting the gym, they reported lower anxiety and fewer negative emotions than when they were entering the gym. So it seemed like after exercising at Cornell, people had a boost in their emotions, which was great. And this has been shown outside of Cornell many times as well. And in terms of sports, I mean, you get the exercise, but also there's some research showing that the social bonds of being on a team can also help for mental health. So yes, lots of benefits for sports and exercise on mental health.
That's so cool how science can back up those things that I feel when I come out of practice. That's awesome. Coach, Commissioner, do you guys have any thoughts on the relationship between sports and mental health?
I mean, I don't know what more to add. I mean, I think to your point, Kari, the data, having the data and research to support, like you said, some of our own assumptions and what we just feel and experience. If I go back to when I was a student athlete, I didn't have that research or knowledge behind me, but I just sort of intuitively felt that about what made me feel good about my day or coming out of practice or whatever, and what didn't. And you try to hopefully find that sweet spot and stay with it. But as I've gotten older, worked in this profession, became more familiar with research like Professor indicated, I think that has really allowed us to shape it and hopefully accelerate it and build out programs now that we can be more thoughtful, intentional about for our student athletes than back 20 years plus when I was in college.
Yeah, I think that it's obvious that physical exercise is a huge benefit for mental health, right? And it's probably one of the first things that when people are struggling with mental health, it's a natural way and the very first thing that it allows for someone to do better, whether it's a walk, whether it's as I said, whether it's a hobby, whether it's golf, whether it's exercise. I think those are kind of the obvious things that we all personally can find the benefit and have recognized that benefit when we're down to clear our mind, to, as Amy said, to go for a walk and find that time to think and self-reflect, rather than being when we exercise, we have a tendency to think, I think deeper and self-reflect rather than being distracted and getting caught up in our thoughts. And I think that it's pretty obvious to all of us probably that how important it is on a day-to-day basis. It's something that we obviously look forward to on a day-to-day basis, that we crave it and we want it, especially the more that we do it.
Right. Oh, you brought up a lot of good points, that it's not just competitive athletics that do it for us. It's the everyday activity, exercising, hobbies that can do a lot for our mental health. And I'm appreciative of those takes. I'm wondering about strong mental health in particular. Why is strong mental health important to being an athlete? And are there effects to having poor mental health? I can speak on tennis as my outlet among the other ways of moving my body, but it's like an aggression thing. I'm like hitting a ball out on the court, but I can also go into a place of kind of negative self-talk. Poor mental health, I don't know. I've played some other sports. never been a commissioner, never been a coach, but when it's not up to par, what could be the impact on student athletes?
I can start, and then certainly would love to hear, from the coach, and because he's day to day directly with the student athletes. In the conference office, we're removed from the day to day experience of the student athletes, and so my exposure to that is limited. But I certainly talk to our athletics directors, talk to our coaches, and on occasion get a chance to talk to our student athletes, whether it's through our conference of student athlete advisory committee or just being on site at a game or a championship. And as we in our industry and society have become more open and talking about this, I really appreciate that, because it does allow us to learn more from each other and about what is important about mental health in particular. But I think it absolutely has an impact, not just on their ability to show up and be their best athlete on the court or on the ice or in the field, but these are student athletes, as you know, Kari, like you're juggling so many different things with respect to academics and other activities that you're involved with. And if you're not in a good space, it's going to have a domino effect on every part of your life. You're from all those things, let alone just your personal relationships that you have with your family, your friends. And so while you're juggling all of those things, that's hard enough, even for those that are in a really good mental mindset. And when something's not right, and when you're not able to sort of fire on all cylinders, then that just the compounding effect of feeling like you're behind or stressed out, I think just has a really sort of negative reinforcing loop on an impact on your ability to maintain all of the things that student athletes are trying to uphold. So I think it's really critical for student athletes in particular or at least many different segments of the college and undergraduate and student body to have resources and try and stay as focused and stay as mentally fit as possible, because the responsibilities are so great and so vast compared to the general student body.
Right, for sure. I know when I walk out of a bad practice, I'm like, oh my gosh, couldn't make a serve. And then I'm turned right to my schoolwork. It could be a dampener on my day, could be a dampener on my weekend, could be affecting my next practice. And then I've got 2 practices where weren't that productive because I was too busy in my head. Professor, is there any science to back data?
Yes, there is research showing that mental health is related to better performance, and even emotions right before practice, right before a competition or something. Having more positive and fewer negative emotions is predictive of better performance. And it can depend a little bit sport to sport. There's a kind of optimal emotions for different sports, but in general, going in with kind of they call it the iceberg profile of mental health, that is a good kind of mindset to be in to lead to the best performance in competitions. So yeah, that definitely fits with the science.
Makes sense. Coach Schafer, have you seen it on your team?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the mental health aspect of it is something that athletes, their least favorite training. It's something that they definitely don't buy into until there's an issue, there's a problem. And I think that what happens is we get so many high performing kids and students at Cornell, is that for the first time in their life, whether it's academic or athletically, they're challenged or they fail. And so a lot of times we hit that age of 19 to 23 or 18 to 22 for the first time in their life, their process has been challenged. Their mental process has been challenged, which makes college and the higher levels of athletics so difficult, right? So you get kids that have been, we call it the mindset, a fixed mindset or a growth mindset when they arrive at Cornell. And if your whole life, all you've worried about is just the process, all you worry about is just trying to get better each day and not worry about the end result. For a lot of kids that come to Cornell, they've been so end result driven, right? So worried about getting a perfect SAT and an A+ on their course, or being recognized and being scouted to do a Division I program, that it's so end result driven, is that when they face reality of where they're not going to be the A+, they have a real struggle. It's a real mental struggle to overcome that. And change their mindset into one of growth rather than, being fixated. And then, part of that is being judged, right? Like, part judged by their parents, by their peers, by their teachers, judged by their coach. And to try to get kids away from that mindset, that unhealthy mindset of worrying about how they're being judged. And now you throw social media into it in the last, 15 years, it's just compounded everything. So yeah, mental health, Yogi Berra, famous quote, right? 50% of this game is 90% mental, and to understand that training themselves mentally to be healthy on and off the field or on and off the ice is a daily thing. It's no different than lifting weights or running. And like a lot of kids, I think they read books on mental health, and it's like reading a book on weightlifting, right? It's you can read the book on weightlifting, it's not going to do anything for you unless you practice. And I think that is the biggest challenge for people with mental health. I call mental health in a lot of different ways. Being mentally healthy is and wanting to perform. You mentioned about your first serve, right? It's about being judged and how to overcome that. And so we talk about giving the tools in order to overcome that and having a different thought process. But that's training, and it's not something that you can just research and read about. It's something you have to practice on a day-to-day basis. So that's where we see the within our sport, it's the biggest gains for an athlete is the mental training aspect of it.
Oh, Coach Schafer, you sound like you really get it. You are dropping absolute gems, speaking facts to the audience right now on trusting the process and how mental health it's a long game that needs to be maintained. So just like physical health, you go out and stretch before a game and you warm up and you cool down. To maintain that level of wellness, it's not just one meditation session. It's not just one visualization session. It's a long process that keeps us at our best, which is really interesting. You said the weightlifting book, if you don't go out and lift the weights, so you're not going to see the gains. If you don't go out and put these tools into practice, you're not going to see the gains either. And speaking of tools, what kind of techniques have you all proved useful or think are useful, whether it's in coaching, studies, careers? Do you think that are really useful to promote your own well-being, the techniques? Well, I think we've been going in order this time, so I'm going to pass it to Commissioner to start us with this question. What techniques have you found useful?
I'll speak just more like personally, because I am curious again on the research and then from a coach and dealing with the teams. But I will admit, I have always been aware of this as an important issue, but it really wasn't until the last probably 14 months that I dove in and applied it to myself personally. We've been doing some things in our conference over the last few years about bringing more awareness to mental health, and our student athletes have embraced that through different social media campaigns and what have you. So I've certainly, I think, given our staff and our schools the resources to do it, but in the, sort of like Coach was talking about, until you start to apply it yourself, I don't know that you fully experience it and understand it. So obviously the last 14 months have been really difficult for 12 to 13 months have been really difficult for a lot of people. And until I sort of fancy myself as a pretty steady person, I know that I've not met any of you before, but I'm pretty steady. It takes a lot to get me riled up, but it was really stressful dealing with everything from just understanding COVID and the pandemic as any citizen in this country or in the world, but then also dealing with it in the context of trying to understand what it meant for college sports last spring semester and then rolling into the fall semester. And, Mike, as a coach, certainly understands what that has been all about throughout this year. And I just started to feel the physical effects of stress for the first time in my life. And that's when I realized, okay, Amy, you gotta sort of raise the flag and figure out what you can do to get yourself back on track. And that was the physical activity stuff. I've downloaded, I use the Calm app and doing things that I've never contemplated before, like the meditation. And as we've talked about, building that into your rhythm as a normal part of your day has been really, really helpful to me personally. So now I feel more confident in sort of preaching this and encouraging our student athletes and coaches to do it, because I myself have experienced it in a different kind of way and different pressures than being a student or student athlete. But at least as a sample size of one in my own life, it certainly has worked, and I understand it, and like just helps us underscore. And I will say, for our whole staff, it's really important for me too. So I've encouraged them. We've just closed the office on certain days so that everyone could take a break. I gifted the Calm app to everyone on our staff because it was so important. It's expensive, for some people, and I didn't want that to be a barrier for their ability to seek resources. So it's just opened my eyes and mind to provide resources, because everyone, needs something a little bit different. And I want to provide that diversity of resources to as many people as possible.
I love that. The Calm app has also been one of my tools, along with Headspace. I just go around and pick whatever one I want at the time. But I like that you offered it to your colleagues. I think at one point it was discounted for students, or Cornell was giving it out for free for a year or something like that. And that's what put me on. So it's things like that help with the initial push, because I wouldn't know where to start with meditation if it wasn't guided by some man on a recording. But because it is, and they have so many offerings, I find one that I like. Coach Schafer, have you seen any techniques on your team or in your life that have really helped foster this positive mental health in terms of athletics?
I go back to it, and everybody's got issues, right? Like, we all have issues. I mean, and I think that coming to understanding that, a little bit of anxiety is good for us, and a little bit of fear is good for us. And I mean, and understanding and coming to grips with our talk about techniques, it's about finding the things that aren't good for us, right? Like too much perfectionism and too much anxiety. And I think it's all individual based for, you talk about techniques for our athletes. It's not so much techniques as really get to know them and what makes them tick and what holds them back, and finding out if it's a lack of assertiveness. There's a book called the Assertiveness Workbook, and it's a workbook to put in place where, athletes and students can become more assertive in their own life, that, prevents a certain set of problems, or a perfectionism. And for me, my resources are a lot of my wife. She's a mental health counselor. So when I find an athlete that that kind of poses a different problem for me, in the sense of, like, I don't know when I don't have the resources, and that I'll talk to her about it and get those resources. It is the biggest most lacking area for a coach, is just fingertip resources. I've always said, if I had the time, I would write a program or have a website where I could be sitting and talking to you, Car, and you're talking to me about a different thing. I could just pull it off the website and say, hey, I really think you need to use this resource, because it's not carte blanche. It's not just a Headspace. It's not just a Calm app, right? It's about what is specifically to you and some of the things that could really help. I think Cornell's missing the boat. I think that we should all have Headspace and the Calm app. It should be something the university provides us, and provides all our students. I mean, it's mental health is the biggest healthcare crisis on our campus, and why we don't provide that for all our students has always kind of amazed me, right? So, but I think it's more specific for me. I don't have one technique, rather than really getting to know, and that takes time. I mean, athletes take a lot of different time about opening up what's really bothering them and what's really holding them back. And that's a whole different, we can talk about that a little bit later on in this program, but it's about a variety of techniques. But I think probably the biggest technique is relationship, getting an opportunity to know who they are, and what is kind of bothering them, and that it's okay, that we all have it. I mean, some of my strengths are my biggest weaknesses, and vice versa. So that's what so I don't have any specific techniques for you.
Oh, well, that advice that you just gave of knowing and being able to identify those places that might be shortcomings is one of the first steps to overcoming them. In my personal life, when I figured out what I was struggling with, it was much easier to make sense of it and fix it. And we're all going through those things. It's the stigma of mental health that stops people from speaking up about it. So the piece that you said about relationships, talking to your teammates, making an open space and an inclusive space to talk to your teammates when you notice them kind of maybe withdrawing or anything that might be a signal that they're going through something. It's about opening up dialogues to make people feel comfortable to begin the relationship building that will really benefit them in the long run. You got me thinking about my team back in Cornell. I hope they're all well. I haven't seen them in a while. But Professor, your take on this question, techniques for mental health. We have some techniques, we have some general advice, we have a lot of gems flying around, but.
Yeah, all the comments that have been made so far have been great. It is important to recognize that different people need different things and you want to have individualized approaches. That's really important. There are so many different campus resources. And so that's one thing, people can use them, but again, finding them and figuring out which one works for which person, that can be a challenge sometimes. I would like to emphasize the importance of social support for a minute. That's been something that's been shown in research time and time again. Social support can have so much positive influence on people and can really buffer the effects of stress and prevent stress from leading to depression if someone has more social support. And I had a student who did a research project on Cornell campus on how students who had higher social involvement had reported like fewer depression symptoms and more happiness. And social involvement was hours spent with their friends or teammates. Varsity sports was one contributor, and then some other kind of high impact clubs and groups and stuff like that. So getting involved and making meaningful connections is so important for students. Something else you mentioned earlier, my research on self-compassion, teaching, having people learn how to have self-compassion, treat themselves with kindness, be able to not be judgmental about a mistake or something like that. School's hard, college is hard, playing sports can be hard too. There are lots of obstacles, losses, bad test grades, etc. Being able to react to those with self-compassion can really buffer the negative effects of them. And that's something that can be trained. Research has shown that people can learn that. I'm happy to provide resources at the end if anyone has questions about that. But yeah, those are just a couple things. I mean, one other small thing, a lot of research recently has been focusing on the negative effects of social media usage on mental health. So that's even just a small thing where sometimes people will engage in too much social comparison when they're on social media. Like, look how all these pictures on Instagram showing how much fun that person's having, not recognizing that like everyone just posts, like usually you're more likely to post good stuff, right? And so it makes other people look like they're having so much fun, leads to social comparisons, which then can reduce mental health. And I know even some athletes have gone out and said they take a social media break before important competitions. I think that can even help too. So it's not like don't use it, but just remember to not use it too much and not to make too many social comparisons when using it.
You guys are giving great tips, and I'm surely taking note of these things that I can take going forward when I get back to campus, and now actually while I'm going into the summer and a big training block coming up for me. So thank you guys for that, and I appreciate you opening up about what's worked in you guys' lives. Professor, you just mentioned the social piece and what it can do for your mental health. This is a highly stressful time, and I think that piece is posing a bit of a challenge for student athletes. This moment that we're in has brought a lot of strife to society, student athletes in particular. How has COVID, a racial reckoning, moving students on and back from campus, these unprecedented times, in quotes, because we hear that all the time. I think it's just a signifier for right now because there's so much going on. I could list the things, go on forever. But how do you think that this moment has impacted the mental health of student athletes? we've got a lot of different perspectives, from a academic, a professor who sees student athletes in the classroom, to a commissioner who oversees a lot of different schools and different programs, and then a man who runs his program from past years coming into this transitional time. How has this moment affected student athletes?
So I remember last year when the pandemic first hit and we had to switch all classes to online and all the spring sports were canceled. I mean, the students were so sad, right? I definitely noticed a drop off in happiness in my class, increased stress, increased anxiety. Yeah, I mean, in bad mood. Some people were saying how much like the isolation and kind of the change in all their plans. They looked so they were looking forward to their competitions, graduation with their friends. That hit them. And as you're saying, again, not having the social connections anymore with all these things being canceled, that's a big help for our mental health, to have the social connections. Then, as you're saying, more stuff started piling up. Racial injustices during the summer on top of the pandemic is just one thing after another. And yeah, it has made it really hard. So many of the students and student athletes I've been talking to have really been struggling. I think some things people have been slowly finding a way to deal with it. But yeah, it's been hard.
It really has been, like you said, slowly finding a way to manage has been one of the keys for me. I know I'm much better now than I was in the beginning of the pandemic, mentally speaking. Figuring out what works for me, figuring out what makes me feel better has taken, a year. We've had a year to put this thing together. But exactly what you said, I was going to my classes. It was the lack of that social connection that I think we were all feeling, but it wasn't tennis so much. I can find ways to play tennis and I can find ways to move my body, but my teammates and the athletic community and the unity of walking around and wearing our Go Big Red, kind of that sense of chemistry in that piece was lost, which I know devastated a lot of student athletes, along with my first spring getting canceled, my second spring getting canceled, my fall tournaments getting canceled. I'm a junior. I've played one season of Ivy League tennis. Hopefully we can get another one in before I go. But that was the sentiment I was hearing from my fellow student athletes and my peers. I'm the president of Cornell Student Athlete Advisory Committee. So we try to do as much as we can to foster that unity between the student athletes when we're not all in the same buildings, all going to the same classes. But it's so challenging over Zoom. And I can't imagine the job that professors have, the job that coaches have, because they're the ones who are tasked with putting together something that has kind of fallen apart. So I'd like to hear Coach Schafer and Commissioner Huchthausen's take on these.
I'm happy to chime in, especially since it's a non-Ivy perspective in the league that did play sports. It is playing sports right now. We just finished the heaviest part of the spring semester this past weekend when we wrapped up our fall sports and our winter sports events. And I will say, I'm far from one to, criticize the decisions of another league, but I understand, I can't understand it because I'm not there, but I can only imagine how much more challenging that has been for Ivy student athletes this year, given the circumstances. And then to layer on top of that, seeing student athletes at other schools participate and, even high school students get it done. I can only imagine that just exacerbates some of the tensions and, those kind of feelings and emotions. But I will say, as we, if I go back to last fall, after we postponed the fall competition, there was still obviously a lot of trepidation about what that meant for those sports, what it meant for our winter sports and spring sports. But, every day that we move through that decision-making process for lots of good reasons of concerns about the virus and spread and infection, those are very real and they still are even to this day. But in hearing from our athletic directors and our university presidents, and then directly from our student athletes about just what you said about that sense of belonging and engagement for some of our teams that were able to practice a little bit last fall. The feedback that we got from our administrators and how important that was just to get on the practice field. No one ever loved practice more than when it's taken away, right? It's one of those things you don't recognize the value of something until it's gone. And so that really was a motivating factor for us. You know, it wasn't the only motivating factor, but it was a big one in terms of, okay, we know this is administratively going to be an incredible challenge, one that we'll probably never face before in our lifetimes, and at least in terms of the operations of what it takes to do practice and competition while you're testing 3 times a week, and the ins and outs of that. That's a whole nother layer of stress, right? When you know on any given day, someone could pop a positive and your team's on pause. That's like, you know, if we talk about that later on in the session, I'm happy to do so. But the motivating factor to get our student athletes back to a place where they felt some form of normalcy, even though it looked and felt different, was just super important. And I can't tell you, you know, the first event that I went to was one of our first round of our basketball playoff games. That was the first live sports event that I went to this year. And, you know, to see the joy on the faces of our student athletes and our coaches doing the thing that they love, one of the things that they love most in the world, was it just made it all worth it. You know, as difficult as it has been, as even the mental health toll that it's taken on some of our student athletes, I think they would all, to a person, say that it was worth it because they got to experience joy again. And, you know, that has been so rewarding. Like I said, even as difficult as this year has been and continues to be over the next month as we try to wrap up our spring sports season, I'm just really glad that we're able to deliver that experience to our student athletes. And I went to our swimming championship this past weekend. The NCAA swimming championship was back in whenever it was, March, I think, right? So our conference swimming meet, this past weekend was more just for participation and the chance to be competitive. And, you know, those student athletes just were so grateful for the opportunity and the experience. And that, you know, makes me feel happy that everything that we went through was worth it. Because that's ultimately what we're here for, is delivering experiences to our student athletes. So, you know, that's a perspective from the outside the Ivy League, at least, but I know that it has been much more different and a different set of issues to student athletes in the Ivy League this year.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming, but I know the first match we have back, it's going to be a good time. Coach Schafer, I know the hockey program, extremely successful. Okay, I've got a fire truck going on behind me, of course. Very successful hockey program. That pause, what did that pause do for your team?
Amy, you're killing us right now with
I know, I'm really sorry.
killing us.
Sorry.
I think, you know, I don't know. It's when it first happened, the only thing I could draw on last spring was 9/11 for our athletes, that how an event changed how we live and how we view things. And then I think there's been a lot of kinds of confusion with regards to just what Amy said. Our athletes here watching other athletes participate has just increased the frustration of the athletes at Cornell and the other Ivy League sports and sports that canceled. Just that, you know, that you know, our institutions couldn't get it done while institutions across the country did. I think there's a huge sense of frustration and anger, to be honest with you. There is with me. I mean, you know, that we couldn't get it accomplished. But I think the biggest thing is to look at a positive, is that you talk about the mental health. I think that, you know, for athletes, I think it's about really, who are you? Like this time alone away from your sport that you dedicate so much time for, and just talking to some athletes, and just even as a coach, really kind of reflecting about who I am as a person. You know, where are my values? Like, is my sport just identify me, you know, who I am, or is there something deeper to me as a person, that the fact that I play hockey, or I play tennis, or, you know, and coming to grips with some of that stuff, and then growing it with some of that. So I think it's been a really interesting time, and you know, I think it's awesome now that for us, the season's college season's over, and now we can get back to some normalcy that we can prepare for a following year. That it's now spring, we have summer, and get ready for the following year. And I think just that having that routine and getting back in it is bringing some of that refreshing attitude that, you know, now the ends is near, and that we can get back to some normalcy and hopefully come out the other side as a better person, better player, better athlete, and kind of a little bit more at grips. And not everybody's there. There is a lot of mental health issues with, you know, a lot of athletes, you know, a lot of people coming out on the other side of this COVID. So, and recognizing that and being able to address it, you know, as a coach is going to be important.
Right. I think this time has made us all stronger in a certain way, mentally, but the piece that you just said, the who am I, when student athletes identify so heavily with that title of student athlete, I play a sport, and that sport is kind of taken away in a swift kind of 2-week period. The searching and the finding who am I outside of my sport can also cause some trepidation, finding another identity or personhood outside of that title was kind of challenging. I know for my fellow student athletes, for myself. And then we leave college, and I just did an episode of my podcast about that. I think I'll be more prepared, have a better sense of self when I don't have it for good. As I graduate, which I'm really scared for. Well, that's the times that we're in and how our different conferences are dealing with mental health right now in this exact moment. But I was wondering, Commissioner Huchthausen, the American East Conference is very close to me. I'm from Baltimore, so shout out UMBC and UMBC men's tennis specifically. Love those boys. But I was wondering, what does athlete mental wellness look like in your conference? I love hearing about other SACs. I stalk their Instagrams just to see ideas for our SAC and our moments with our community. But I want to talk about Cornell resources too, with your perspective in, and what do you guys do for your student athletes?
Yeah, so it's been like a lot of things, an evolution over the last few years, and it's really, this is an effort completely driven by our student athletes, try to be really responsive to them on these kinds of issues. And it's been a few years that one of our institutions, I think it was the University of Vermont, that I think was a real leader in our league early on with respect to mental health, getting their campus SAC involved. And importantly, and we know how this goes, getting some of their ice hockey and men's basketball players to help lead the charge. They were very vocal about that, using their platform at those games, which has just helped the awareness. And so those conversations entered our conference SAC, and we began to roll out different variations of social media campaigns just to promote the awareness so that people felt more comfortable, you know, that this is a safe conversation. It's the right conversation to be happy. You shouldn't be ashamed in all of the stigma around that. And so we've done, when COVID happened and everyone was, you know, like you, Kari, stuck at home and not able to connect, we facilitated different things. Student athletes interviewing a different student athlete from another school, like for a Zoom video or an Instagram live video. We've done that. We had teams play while they couldn't play game, you know, a real soccer game together until the spring. We had like 2 soccer teams from Stony Brook and Albany, for example, like get on Zoom and do Pictionary and play against and compete against each other, just so there was a little bit of sense of competition and rivalry that we were all missing so much. But one story that I love to tell, to show, I think, how a conference can really help facilitate change, because I do believe this ultimately rests on each campus. They are the facilitators for actual change because you touch student athletes directly. But one of the things that we rolled out a couple years ago now is it was a spin on the Players Tribune, where they have pro athletes write their own stories. We did a AE Voices feature where we had student athletes who were willing to talk about their mental health struggles or life challenges. We had a men's lacrosse student athlete reach out to, I think she played softball at UMBC. I can't remember exactly, that's terrible, but someone that they never would have had a chance to interact with, right? But he read her story And there was something in there that resonated with his own experience, and it prompted him to feel comfortable seeking help. And that is like the power of creating awareness, battling the stigma, and creating community around this that extends beyond just one team, extends beyond just one campus, but throughout a conference. And those are the kind of stories that I'm super proud of our league, our student athletes, administrators, athletic directors, and presidents for supporting our efforts in mental health, because that's exactly what we're trying to establish, is what we've all talked about: connection, belonging, identity. And so, we'll continue to grind away and find ways for our student athletes across campuses to connect and continue to support and promote positive mental health.
Oh, I could not have said it better myself. Those sound like awesome pieces and ways to connect in a time that we couldn't, and student athletes were going through a lot mentally. I want to pivot to audience questions, but before we do, just gonna plug some Cornell resources, because you were just talking about resources. I mean, I did ask you, but Cornell has done a really good job with CAPS and Cornell Health on campus to provide same-day appointments. When you call their number, you can go to group therapy, group counseling, let's talk sessions, one-on-one, student athlete specific things, all types of centers on campus, crisis lines. Cornell Minds Matter sponsoring today's program. EARS, kind of an iffy thing. We'll see if EARS comes back, but you can go to the residential halls, program houses, WADI, Dean of Students, Student and Campus Life, all of these different places. But I think some of the most impactful things are speaking to the people around you. People might not be so motivated to go to one of these really structured services, but if you can reach out to a friend, that is just as good. So with that, audience questions. There's a lot of good questions here in the Q&A, but an anonymous attendee has a question for each of you guys, as well as some other questions. We have 15 minutes. I want to ask all of these questions. I'll start with Coach Schafer, one directed at you. Do you talk about mental health when recruiting? Do you think it matters to students to hear coaches talking about it?
Not in the recruiting process. I think that in the recruiting process that, and speaking of the recruits that know that we hopefully have the kind of relationship that when they have problems, because every student athlete has problems at some point in time, some type of adversity is going to hit, and that hopefully that we're the kind of coaching staff that they would lean on in order to talk about their issues. And I think that, Amy brought this up, in talking about our conference. I wanted to make sure, before we kind of get off the subject, in the mental health, one of the areas I think that is the awareness is out there and talking about it. And there's all kinds of programs talk about, mental health and having awareness. And I think it has a lot to do with, people. I'm really blessed to have a great trainer and, with our program that our guys feel comfortable in coming and talk to. But, before, we could kind of get going, there's a real lack of training. Like you talk about recruiting. When I was a young coach, it was the last thing on my mind, mental health, right? Like I'm thinking about how to change culture and win and, recruit. And I'm not thinking about mental health. But yet, even in our own athletic department, we have a meeting that says, let's look out for each one. Let's keep an eye on our athletes, right? We don't talk about the process of what that means. We don't do any training with regards to bringing coaches in and saying, what are you going to do to build the trust with your team? What are you going to do to build that trust so that athletes don't feel like they're going to be judged if they come to you with a mental health issue? Like, do you talk to them? What are you going to do to train your athletes to watch out for each other, and so that they can confide and watch out and help to get people to talk about their mental health, right? Like we haven't had any of that kind of training in our athletic department. That we talk about mental awareness, and it's not a stigma, and mental health, but we don't do anything to give with regards to give our coaching staff the tools. We refer, and we have great trainers. Our trainer does a great job of referring athletes to all those resources that you're talking about. But it's about having the training to identify, have the training to make sure your athletes are looking out for each other, the training to make yourself trustworthy, to know that your athletes you're not going to judge your athletes. It's just like it's just an issue that no different than it's a back problem or a leg problem, or it's an issue that needs to be addressed and overcome. And that is, so in the recruiting process, no, we don't talk about that in the recruiting process, but you hope that, you impress upon the recruit that this is a place that we're here more than, that cares more than you just as an athlete, that, we're here to develop a relationship with you as a coach. And I wish that we'd have all this, the type of training for all our coaches and all our athletes, so that we could address our athletes. I think which we do a pretty good job in our program. But I know we could do a better job of, getting young men to open up to each other and talk about some of the things that bother them. And so that's where, to answer your question in a much deeper way, I wish that we would go forward as an athletic department, as a team, as a coaching staff, and as a training staff, even within our own program.
Wow, I appreciate your honesty with that answer. Even if it's not here, we'll counsel you, because mental health is a complex topic and not everybody is equipped to have those conversations and be the most beneficial help. I don't think I could counsel somebody. I can point them to a resource, but I don't even think I'm equipped to talk to my friends on some of the issues that they're dealing with. I've never been through them. I can't relate to that type of thing. I can empathize, but sometimes I don't feel like I can be that person for them as much as I want to be. So even you making sure the recruit knows that you're open and that we're trusting, we care about you more than just a winning student athlete, I think that goes a long way. Two, well, in the same vein, Professor Zitek, I would like to ask you, point this question to you. Should programs have guidelines in terms of approaching mental health with student athletes and recruits? If so, what would you recommend that coaches and commissioners do as these guidelines, or just a set of kind of principles for guiding mental health in their programs?
Yeah, I think it's a great question that follows well from what Coach Schafer was just saying. It would be great to give training. Professors at Cornell recently have been getting a lot of messages about reminding us to what resources we have on campus and to keep an eye out for our students' mental health and letting us know if they're stressed and how to handle it and stuff like that, which I find very helpful. But more specific, yeah, training, make sure everyone's aware of these things. I mean, the first thing is, as was mentioned, having awareness of the importance of mental health, destigmatizing it, having some kind of training for that, perhaps something at the beginning of the season, bringing out an athlete who's struggled with depression or anxiety and have them talk about it if they're willing to, in an open way, to destigmatize it, make it normalize it, so people will start feeling comfortable asking for help, making sure, right, like all the coaches and training staff understand the importance, again, letting them know the resources. Some of them may have come from a program where mental health was not emphasized and people weren't supposed to say anything if they're struggling. And so if a coach was in a program like that and then they go to another school, you don't want them passing that on to their athletes. So some kind of training from time to time, just to make sure that everyone understands. And again, there can be school specific resources and stuff like that. I mean, it is hard. Ideally, in some cases, as you were just saying, talking to like a licensed counselor or clinical psychologist or something is the most important thing. You can't solve all the issues in-house, and no one expects that to happen. But again, it's important to know where to refer and when to refer people to different resources and stuff like that. And so, yeah, some kind of, I can imagine some like document guideline thing. It'd probably be different for different schools, but it could be really helpful.
Right. That's why I had to tie those two questions in together. In an ideal world, what could we do for student athletes? I think steps like these, having a bunch of distinguished professionals come on and talk about mental health, breaks some of the stigma, gives people ideas, energizes people to do something and bring it into their programs too. So it's little baby steps sometimes. Commissioner, I've been grilling you guys, throwing everybody questions. I've got one from another anonymous attendee. How has the conference addressed mental health challenges arising from cross-country travel for athletes, like when Stanford competed in field hockey championships, and reaffirming player confidence in sanitary athletic statements, spaces like when Binghamton was recently crowned swim and dive champions? I think this one's
really, really good question. On the first part of the cross-country travel, like Stanford's really the only one, and they're an associate member in our conference for field hockey, which is a whole nother story. I know that may be confusing to some people, but they are associate members of the America East in field hockey and just won our field hockey championship this past weekend. You know, that was probably our original sort of 10 America East members haven't done that type of travel this year for obvious reasons. But I do know, like in basketball season, because we did a full double round robin, we didn't schedule by geography. And there were some teams that expressed concern with getting on an airplane. And so they took the long bus ride instead of the shorter airplane ride. And so I think our schools were attentive to that from a sanitary and exposure standpoint. We didn't, to be honest, we at the conference office didn't get involved too much in travel plans or anything like that. I will say I did have a chance to talk for a long time with the Stanford field hockey coach this weekend, and they've been on the East Coast now for over a week because they came out to finish the regular season and then just stayed here for a conference championship. They also, to add to it a little bit, you know, they are one of the programs, the 11 programs that the university announced was getting dropped at the beginning of this year. And so that is a whole nother layer. You know, I get that the Ivy teams weren't able to compete this year, but think about if you were told at the beginning of the summer, or late summer, that after this year was going to be your last year, and we didn't even know if you were going to play because of COVID. So they've been dealing with an incredible amount of anxiety at obviously a very high caliber academic institution. And so that has really been a challenge for them individually, collectively, as a team from a mental health perspective. Their head coach was open about that with me. I talked to a couple of their student athletes, and you can see it in some of even just the interviews that they did with us, how difficult this year has been. So, you know, I think our coaches are attentive to it. I mean, you know, shame on those who haven't been. I don't know how you could not be attentive to the mental health needs of student athletes in this given year with the health and safety, with COVID, with the challenges of student athletes going in and out of quarantine. You know, we've had some basketball players, that was the longest season, right? We had some basketball players that in total spent, you know, over 30 days in quarantine between, you know, July when some of them came back through the end of February when our regular season ended. That is a lot of time in isolation, for any person, let alone a college student who might be away from his or her family and hasn't been able to see them. So those are the kind of extra things that had to be dealt with in order to get competition underway this year. So like I said earlier, it was a struggle this year. There's no question about it. And we just tried to be as attentive to that as possible from a conference office with how we were scheduling to reduce trips. And, you know, we worked really diligently with our health and safety committee to make sure that there were policies and protocols in place so that student athletes felt safe when they went into a locker room. Or maybe you don't go into locker room in these sports because it's just not worth the risk. You know, you can change on the bus. We all did it when we were, you know, young kids and in high school. And so you give up some of those luxuries that we're used to as Division I programs to preserve your health, your physical health and safety, but also your mental health and safety as well.
Oh, it's interesting to hear about how conferences were making it work. I understand the Ivy League thought it was too big of a public health concern. That's public health. I cannot do anything about that, and I actually support it. But it sounds like there was a lot of different comfort levels that were taken into account when you guys were traveling or deciding on where to go and that sort of thing. And I think that's the attention to mental health that has a good outcome. Had it been student athletes not feeling comfortable already on the brink and then being pushed to do something that they didn't want to do, that could have been not the best mix of things. So glad you guys could pull it off with that level of consideration. we've got 1 minute left. I don't know if you guys can stay any longer. There's a couple more questions, but I think Mike's telling me I got to wrap it up. Maybe I can send you guys these questions and get back to all of the attendees here. Here are the last couple of questions because they're anonymous. I don't even know who sent them. But to conclude, I want to thank you guys so much for speaking to me. I got a lot from this conversation. Cornell's SAC is doing a lot, trying their best to foster some mental health with our student athletes. Hashtag don't bear it alone is our campaign. You know, go big red bears. Just trying to stay connected in the ways that we can. And you guys have given me a lot of good advice and gems and things to look out for in my team. So I appreciate it a lot, and you guys sharing to destigmatize this sort of thing. With that, I'll pass it to Mike. Hopefully he's here, ready to go. There he is.
Corey, thank you so much for moderating such a robust discussion about mental health in sports. A huge shout out and thank you to our wonderful panelists, obviously who are working tremendously hard in their various spaces to cultivate the next generation of leaders. So thank you to everyone so much for taking the time out of their afternoon and now evening to join us. Be sure to check out Corey on BRSN's Amped, newest podcast, amplifying the voices of underrepresented student athletes at Cornell, and follow us at Cornell BRSN on Instagram and social media. And hope everyone enjoys a relaxing and healthy rest of your spring season. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Professor, one time during freshman year, I emailed you to take one of your classes.